Soccer Today is powered by Spin Media. From podcast to video production, visit spinmediadigitalsolutions.com and bring your content to the next level.
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo, golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today for Monday, September 12th, 2022. I'm Kev Laramie, joined by Duane Rollins, as today we are back for new shows this week, as we are back from a few weeks of working a lot, having some technical difficulties, and needed to refresh a couple of the batteries, bringing into today where Duane will be breaking down the playoff races in the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. Another team has booked their tickets to the playoff dance, and a couple teams have put themselves out of contention. We have an official eliminated team too in the Eastern Conference. But first of all, how are you today?
I'm doing well. This is probably the longest stretch I've gone without podcasting since 2013. So yeah, it's good to be back. Refreshed and ready to talk. We're going to probably brush over a lot of what missed and just jump in like we didn't stop.
Yeah, exactly. Why just mull over Mihailovic's transfer, Kone's failed transfer, and a couple of great wins by Montreal, and let's go right there. A draw that felt like a win. At Stade Saputo last Friday, CF Montreal was 2-0 down going into late in the game, 89th minute, and they came back. Wanyama scored his first of the season, and then Zachary Broguillard, 4 minutes into injury time, he scored the tying goal, and that's the second time this year Montreal has clawed back a deficit. The last time was against Columbus earlier this year. Duane, Columbus is on a great stretch. They were 16-1-9 heading into the game on Friday, and that one in that record, the only loss they had in their 16 previous matches was against Montreal in Columbus, when Montreal scored late in the game to make a trailing to a victory, if you permit the expression, and Montreal got a great win there, and it started a great stretch for Montreal. That was August 3rd, and on Friday, Montreal did it to Columbus again. This time, it was only 1 point, but it felt like a win, because 1 point is all that was needed to clinch a playoff berth, a true playoff berth, not a play-in just like in 2020, but this time a true playoff berth for the first time since 2016. Montreal will also probably host a playoff game. Duane, Montreal is the best Canadian soccer team right now.
Well, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, I suppose the CanPL fans could, have an argument that they'd be wrong in, but nonetheless, it for sure, definitely amongst the three MLS teams. There's no question about that. Voyageurs Cup win by Vancouver aside. Look, the Montreal reminds me, you're familiar with the old fable, the old children's story, the tortoise and the hare, right?
Yeah.
They kind of remind me of the bit of the tortoise here, in the sense that they're not ever jumping out and flashy every week, but they just consistently grind away and get result after result after result. And ultimately, when you look at over 34 games, that's something to rejoice in, to celebrate. They deserve to be considered the best team in Canada right now, and they, in what I think is arguably one of the weakest overall conferences I can ever remember in MLS. They are among one of the two teams that I think are decent. And I'm eliminating the NYCFC from that decent side right now. I mean, there's enough talent there that they could maybe get it going, but they're certainly not playing consistently enough for me to consider them among the elite. I don't know what to make of the Red Bulls, but Philadelphia obviously to me is the clear favorite in the East, but Montreal's right there.
Yeah, well, Philly is like on another level. Philly is, if they would have started the year a bit better, they would be on record-setting pace. Right now, they could technically not even break the record. They would fell short at 72 points if they would win out, having 3 games left to play. But what's interesting is the amount of goals Philadelphia has scored over the last few games, a few months, like winning game 6-0, 7-1, 4-0 like there's no tomorrow. And Montreal is also doing really well in that department. 55 goals for, 47 goals against. Of course, Montreal is famous for their record on the road this year so far. 9 wins, 4 losses, and 2 draws. The second best record on the road behind New York. New York is the best team on the road so far this year with a 9-3-3 record. The only difference is Montreal has 1 less draw on the road than New York. But Montreal is the second best team on the road in the entire league. And that has made a big difference in the standings. That is why Montreal is second, because their home record is close to 500 with a 7-5-3 record, which means 7 wins, 5 losses, and 3 draws this year. One of those losses was at the Big O and not Stade Saputo, so that's why not just the record at Stade Saputo. This is a record in Montreal overall.
Yeah, look, it starts with they're just solid, right? It starts with that spine, the core of that team, which for Canadian national team fans is got to make you happy because a lot of the core of the team is Canadian national team players. So,
well, speaking of, maybe we should talk a little bit about Joe Waterman and how he should be in the national team going forward. He's probably playing well enough to deserve a spot in the national team heading into not only the friendlies later on this month, but probably Qatar. He is one of the best defenders in the league, and I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to take a second and bring my stats sheets up because, Duane, when I look at the leaders in the league in a few different categories, a few Montreal players stand out, and it's surprising it's not the categories that you would think. One of them is passes into the final third. There's 2 Montreal players in the top 10. Kamal Miller is third, Canadian, 160 passes in the final third, and he's a center back playing on the left side of Montreal's center back trio, and he's finding himself in the top of the league, scoring a great goal very recently. And Joe Waterman is ninth, 150 passes into the final third. A great performance that if you just heard my dog, she's really passionate about Joel Waterman. She loves the Canadian kid. But that's Canadian defenders. And then you add Alistair Johnston, and that's 3 long-term Canadian defenders. Finally, this country has learned to raise great defenders.
Well, and look, if you want to go sort of where they came from, Alistair Johnston came through a back door, played college, played in League One Ontario. Joel Waterman obviously came through the CanPL in their first season. So these are guys that didn't necessarily follow the traditional path and weren't necessarily identified early on in their career. Go back 5-6 years ago, those are guys that fall through the cracks, right? So that's an acknowledgement that things have changed in this country for the better, and there's lots of room to still improve. But I think we lose sight of the fact of how much improvement we had when it comes to the national team level. In terms of Waterman, we mentioned this, I think about 6 weeks ago. We mentioned the possibility of him getting a call up in the September camps. I don't think there's any doubt that he should. The only question I have, and we're going to talk a lot more about the Canadian men's national team in the days ahead because we're coming into an international break, and it will start to increasingly become our focus as it gets closer to the World Cup. But the only question I have is whether John Herdman is going to remain loyal to those who brought him to the dance, so to speak. It's a question. You look at his play versus Daniel Henry barely playing.
Yeah.
And it's hard to make that argument for Henry other than, that they want to keep the team together. But that's, yeah.
And when he is playing, like we saw against Montreal for TFC, not saying that he's a liability, but he did cost maybe Toronto's season in a way that now Toronto is so far away from a playoff spot that they're closer to being eliminated than making the playoffs. And we might talk about this a little later in the show. Just before we continue, yes, it's a draw. It's a 2-2 draw. Columbus did get lucky on a couple of occasions and, of course, on one of their goals. Total team expected goal for Columbus in this one was 0.7. Montreal was 2.2. Montreal 22 shots, 10 on target. That is high percentage here and good accuracy with the amount of goals scored for Montreal later in the game. Montreal is one of the best teams this year when you add all of what I call the attacking metrics. So, Duane, if you look at the passing accuracy, if you look at the possession average, Montreal is in the top 10, top 5 in most categories that are offensive this year, and we're seeing the results on the scoreboard. Most weeks, because as much as we've talked about defending, in Major League Soccer, there is a correlation between your attack and your success, not only in the regular season, but also in the playoffs.
No, for sure. I mean, having a solid back allows you to attack with a little more confidence. I think it comes down to that, and vice versa, right? Like, you need a balanced team, obviously, to win. But look, the final thought I have on Montreal really is, you could make the argument, especially if you look at the roster at the start of the year, you might say that this was a year away from maybe truly being, you might need a couple more pieces, so on and so forth. But the thing about Major League Soccer, guys, is that when you are into the business end of the season, which we are, I mean, we're a month ahead, right? Like, normally this would be October when we're talking about the amount of games played. So think of it in those terms, right? If you can't wrap your head around how close we are to the end, we are. When you're this close to the end and you're in second place in the conference, there is no next year. This is the year. You've got to put it in and not assume that you're going to be able to pick up. And look at the reps. You can't assume that you're going to pick up and do it again a year later. Like, things change fast in this league. So.
And Georgi Mihailovic is leaving in January. We know that. There's a very high probability Ismael Kone is gone in January. So Montreal, the future is now. The future is literally now for CF Montreal.
Yeah, and they're as you mentioned, I don't think there's any doubt that they're going to play their first home playoff game since 2016 this year. And really, as you mentioned, it's kind of their first playoff game since 2016 as well. That 2020 season was a little bit weird. 10
teams out of 13 made the playoffs that year. So that's like 70-something% of the teams making the playoffs. But Montreal is fully deserving of their play this year. And because there's not one team really taking the Eastern Conference by storm outside of Philadelphia, Montreal is finding himself with a 1.77 points per game average this year, which is pretty good. Like, it's very decent. It's closer to, it's almost getting closer to a win than to a draw most games, and that's very, very good for Montreal. It's their best season ever for wins already, for goals already, for wins on the road, for the amount of a lot of records this year that they have already broken, and they will continue to be seen as the best ever CF Montreal team, Montreal Impact team ever. And that's without a superstar in the like of Nacho Piatti or Didier Drogba or Marco Di Vaio. Heck, Ramel Kyoto is only 5 goals away from beating the record of Nacho Piatti of Di Vaio of 20 goals in one regular season in Major League Soccer, which was done in 2013 by Marco Di Vaio. But right now, it's a great team that, yes, you have Ramel Kyoto, who's performing better than most designated player in the league. 15 goals, 6 assists, if I'm not mistaken. I might be off by 1 or 2. I've stopped the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me. But it's quite a season by Ramel Kyoto. Quite a season by other players that are stepping up. Samuel Piette in the midfield has regained his starting job, is playing at a very high level, 89% passing accuracy rate this season, and he has a 94% long or mid to long passing accuracy this year. Duane, 15 to 30 yards for Samuel Piette is 94% accurate. That is a very high number, and you correlate that with James Pantemis's play with the long balls, having a very, very high percentage of successful passes from the goal kick position. When he does a goal kick, it's not just a wasted ball, it's a long pass, falling most times to the feet of a Montreal player, and that is part of Montreal's play. It's all thought through, and that is why Wilfried Nancy is right now the front runner for Coach of the Year.
Yeah, I mean, I we'll see on that. It doesn't matter whether they win it or not, whether he should win it or not. Those are two different conversations, right? Ones that we can have moving forward. Look, yeah, they are absolutely, if you consider your Coach of the Year ballot to be for the coach that has most outperformed the expectations heading into the season, it's him or Austin, right? Like, that's where we're coming down to. But look, although Austin's trailing off right now, if you look at the results over the past couple of weeks, and maybe that was to be expected when you're relying particularly on the offensive output of a single player, which I think Austin's season really does often. Montreal's playing very well, and they're playing well based on a lot of Canadian plays. There's a lot to like about that team. I'm saying this from Toronto. I'm not really going to play the rivalry hat right now because I wouldn't get very far with it anyway. This is a team that most Canadian neutrals should be supporting because, it, as I say, it has a great Canadian footprint. You mentioned Piat, too. Quick last thought on that. He plays in a position which we kind of we might have questioned what kind of role he would have at the World Cup. You look at some of the players, and not just how their form is right now, because form can get overlooked. It's like how much time they're going to be off, and that is kind of one of those things that I'm worried about heading into the World Cup, is how many MLS players are going to be
especially off. Atiba. Should we talk about Atiba's situation where his contract is now frozen by Besiktas, being put aside by the club, and not being a regular player for the foreseeable future, at least a few months heading into a World Cup? That's not good news.
No, and you look at the TFC contingent too. I mean, outside of a miracle, they're not playing in the playoffs, and even if they make the playoffs, they're not going to go far in them.
And they haven't seen the field as much, or the former TFC ones like Schaffelberg, who's gone, and his stock has fallen a little bit, most stocks in the 2020 stock market.
Look, yeah, there's a concern there. It's also a concern for our American listeners out there, for the U.S. based players that are coming from MLS as well. It's obviously going to be a concern to make sure that these guys get playing time, because even unless you go to MLS Cup, you're even if you go into the playoffs, you're still going to be off nearly a month by the time you're starting to play again. And I'm not sure how they get around that, other than maybe they camp. Maybe you bring some guys into a camp early, and it's complicated.
Well, yeah, and I assume there'll be a situation where players will train with teams, and oftentimes we have MLS teams that are continuing to train all the way until mid-November, regardless if the season finishes early, because they basically started the preparation for the next season, because contractually speaking, the teams have the rights of the players all the way to November. We'll see how this changes this year with the World Cup and the different there. But for Montreal, the playoffs will start in the weekend of the 15th of October, and we'll see there how long they'll play, because there's a few defenders that might come into the World Cup really fresh, like Johnston and Miller.
Yeah, I mean that's hope. I mean, there's a fine line between getting a bit of a break and going on. Look, the World Cup across the board is going to depend a lot on what happens over the next 6 to 8 weeks in club play, because Kevin De Bruyne, God, knock on wood here, for my club team, I'm knocking on wood, could blow his knee out tomorrow, right? And that's going to make a major difference in that first
Of course, now Duane has said that on air, so he just put it out there, and sometimes it materializes, and this happens. He will not be really a happy supporter of Manchester City. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we will look at the other results in Major League Soccer. We will look at the standings and the battle for the playoffs, and the Canadian Premier League. We will look at where it stands, heading into the last stretch of the season in the Canadian Premier League after this short break.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at SoccerTodaySPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
And we're back on Soccer Today. Shout out to our patrons at patreon.com/2solitudes. We are back, patrons, and it's good to be with you all. Shout out to the great Sean Richardson, because I know you said you missed us on Twitter, and Tater Brooks, he said he missed us on Twitter too, and we missed all of you as well. Back on video later this week. If you like the show on video, take a second and please subscribe to our YouTube page. We're still on the journey to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and we're not there yet. We need your contribution. We need your love on YouTube. Click on that subscribe button, and while you're at it, might as well subscribe and download our podcast, available everywhere you find your favorite podcasts. And that is your homework for the evening. Subscribe to our YouTube page. I thought it was interesting for New York to finally get a result at home consistently. And this time, Duane, New York was at home against New England, and late in the game, coming through the Red Bulls, helping my bankroll. I had banked on the Red Bulls, and the Toros delivered on Saturday.
Yeah, I need some help on my bankroll, because the NFL first week didn't do me well.
Oh, I'm not going to brag here, but I'm quite on the opposite spectrum of that right now.
Yeah.
I got a 75% hit rate this weekend. It's a great day today.
Bet responsibly, folks. Anyway, I was doing pretty well for the Champions League last week too. I won $100 on League Cup too. Anyway, where were we? Red Bulls. Yeah, I don't know what to make of the Red Bulls. They're similar to Montreal in the sense that that they're kind of solid and I think taking advantage of what is a weaker East. But again, who cares? There's not gonna be like an asterisk if you win the MLS Cup. But the East was weak. No one's gonna care, right? So you take advantage of what's out there, and you hope to build for next year. And that's the Red Bulls model too, is to just always be consistent and take advantage of down years here and there, or take advantage of a hot season or what have you. But look, it's topsy-turvy. It's MLS in a nutshell going on right now. I don't know who the favorite is. You look at LAFC falling off the map after they thought they were unstoppable, and now suddenly they're quite stoppable. So it's been quite the little roll in our off time, Kevin. We would have had a lot to talk about.
Exactly. So let's just look a little bit at the other results throughout the league, and then we'll look at the standings. So we'll just take a little second and look at the few results across the league. Nashville, a red card here, and against the Galaxy, it finished 1-1 in Nashville, which is not a bad result. Hani Mukhtar, who else, scored his 22nd goal of the season, if I'm not mistaken, and that would put him at the top of the leaders. Yeah, 22nd, he's on top, and Driussi is second in the goal-scoring race, but Hani Mukhtar continues his MVP performance this year. Walker Zimmerman got a red card and he'll be missing the next match for Nashville, and that is maybe the one thing to take out of this one. It will cost them to be missing maybe their best player in Zimmerman. And Philadelphia was playing against a good team of Orlando. It was in Chester, in Pennsylvania, and Philadelphia put the Lions to the sword. But only 5 goals this time, not 7. 5-1. What a performance once again by Philly, who continues to just plow through opponents after opponents.
Plus 46 goal differential. That's like...
It's more goals. Like, their differential is better than the entire attack of Chicago.
Yeah, that's like Man City in the Premier League kind of stuff. That's like
Chicago scored. Yeah. Chicago scored 31 goals. Charlotte scored 35 goals. DC scored 32 goals. Philadelphia's differential is 46. They scored 68 goals. I don't know what the record is off the top of my head for the most amount of goals scored, but they have to be close, if not already overtaking that record. While you talk, I'll figure it out.
Yeah, well, within the duration of this show's history, we were talking about whether Jim Curtin's job was in jeopardy, like, a lot. So, clearly they stuck with a plan, and they've managed to create a plug-and-play system in Philadelphia, which allows them to take advantage of seasons like this when they are playing in a weak division. I don't think there's any doubt, and that's not dismissing what they're doing. They're beating what's in front of them. They are creating team goals, and they are creating team goals consistently, and they're not relying on a single player. That bodes well in a single game elimination situation where you can't just isolate a player and low block your way out of it problem and maybe get a fluke win like say Salt Lake did against Seattle last year. So
as much as their attack is really good, Duane, the record might be out of reach. For some reason, the record is LAFC in 2019, and it's 85 goals in the season. That's crazy. The Galaxy is second with 85 goals in 98. DC United had 74 goals in a season in 1998, followed by TFC in 2017 with 74. Philadelphia has 68 right now. Right now, they would be equal for the 10th all time. So depending on how many goals they score in 3 matches, they have 3 games left. If they score 5 a game, that would be 15. So they would be all the way to 83. Oh, they would need to score more than 5 goals a game. If they go to 6 average or over, they could overtake the LA Galaxy. But scoring 18 goals in 3 games is a tall order.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. Well, what I will say is this. Having watched that 2017 TFC team that you mentioned there very closely, obviously, Philadelphia's doing it a bit different in the sense that they seem to be growing and growing and growing. The 2017 TFC team was winning at the end of the season, but they were winning tighter as the games went on, whereas Philadelphia seems to be getting better and spreading wins out more now that it gets later in the year. I don't know what that's about, but they have gone in the course of our little forced break here from being like the best team in the East to, I think, the MLS Cup favorite right now, and that has a lot to do with LAFC dropping some points, a lot of points in the last little while. They're down to 8 losses now. Almost look human. I mean, they lost to Dallas in the weekend.
It's almost like all the new players destroyed the chemistry they had.
Yeah, that would be the argument, right? And yeah, it's not Football Manager.
No, exactly. All right, let's talk about Atlanta and Toronto, not for the football or the standings reasons, Duane, and not even for Toronto probably, but more for Atlanta, because The one big drama aspect that we didn't talk about when we were gone is, of course, Josef Martinez and Gonzalo Pineda, the altercation in the locker room, close to fisticuffs, I was told, but allegedly it was separated. Can they live together? I don't know. We'll know. It was already mentioned that Gonzalo Pineda will be back next year. Does that mean that Josef Martinez will not be back? That's the question. But after this victory, it was also suggested by a couple of players that they dedicate this win to Josef Martinez, which is fascinating. It's a mess in that locker room, but they still found a way to beat Toronto 4-2.
Yeah, well, quickly on TFC, one shot directed towards target in the first half in a game that you had to win tells me that this is a team that's checking out. I mean, Insigne wasn't playing, so that's that, but you can't be relying on a single player. That's fine. Bernardeschi continues to be the best signing of that anyway, but nonetheless.
Of course, and the thing is if he would have been there earlier, not that it was possible, but his scoring rate would have been probably record worthy if you score a goal every 1.5 game, which is what he has done since playing for TFC.
And I'm going to be very excited about that stat about next February.
Yes. When he's like, okay, one full season, hopefully in shape after a few months of recovery and rest, with a motivated Insigne and hopefully a better defense. Yeah, Toronto could be good next year.
Yeah, but they're not good now, and we saw that in the weekend.
No, because they're front heavy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, look, there's plenty of time to talk about TFC offseason, so I'm moving on from them right now. And the Montreal game killed them. I think their morale was snapped. The way they lost the Montreal game up 2-0 10 minutes in. Anyway, my Atlanta. Sorry, Kevin, you can jump in on that in a second. But just to pick up on your thought on Atlanta, I think it's time to move Joseph on. Honestly, you look at this team, and he obviously was a brilliant player in 2017 and 2018. One of the best seasons maybe the best season in MLS history in 2018, right? For Josef Martinez in terms of an individual player. Since he blew his knee out at the start of the 2019 season, he has not been the same player, but he has been the same attitude. And that attitude always was big, and that attitude always caused problems. But when he was scoring, it didn't matter. He doesn't score at that rate anymore. Atlanta needs to rethink everything. They are what they are now. This is not that team that used that advantages they had in the first 3 years to win an MLS Cup and to be a dominant force in the league. They just are. They are the 10th place team in the Eastern Conference by merit right now, which says something about TFC, which they're worse than them. But regardless, you look at the two teams that played in the weekend that we're talking about right now, which one are you going to take next year? You're probably going to take Toronto over them because one team seems to be doing the same thing over and over again. TFC, God bless them. They punted on the season, but they have reset completely, and we'll see what happens next year.
All right, let's continue quickly our scores overview before we move on to CanPL. Cincinnati, the biggest win in their history, 6-0 against San Jose. Thank you. I had a couple of the players in my fantasy. Last week, I had Matt Miazga, and I had Luciano Acosta as my captain. Yes, he did not play the first game, but he made me a solid 34 points in the second. Thank you very much. Big win for Seattle, 3-0. Still in contention for a playoff place with this one. Chicago, big win, but too little too late. Houston, Sporting Kansas City, 0-0. We will not talk about that more than just now. Dallas, LAFC 2-1. And quickly we'll finish with Salt Lake, DC, 0-0. Colorado, Vancouver, big win for Colorado. Too little too late. I don't think they'll make the playoffs. And Portland, 1-0 on Saturday night against Minnesota. That's a big defeat for Minnesota as they fall to 6th in the conference. Portland now 5th in the Western Conference. LAFC top of the West, Austin 2nd, Dallas 3rd, Nashville 4th. As of right now, if the playoffs were to start this morning, Duane, LAFC would have a bye in the Western Conference. Austin would face Salt Lake. Dallas will face Minnesota, and Nashville will face Portland in the first round. On the Eastern Conference side, we will have Montreal versus Columbus, New York versus Cincinnati, and New York City versus Orlando. Those would be the playoffs if they were to start today.
LFC's magic number to clinch the West is 1, so they only need to get one more point the rest of the way, or see Austin drop a point, and they will win the West. But what is interesting about that potential playoff listings that you just listed there is who's not in them. That would be the Seattle Sounders, of course, the CCL champions, who have had the same CCL hangover that the TFC had, that every team that has gone deep in this competition has had in the history of it in MLS. It's something to address if they truly want to compete that, particularly with the mid-season thing they're going to play in the next few years. What all teams are going to be doing, I just that might even it out, but they got to figure that out.
They're 4 points away from Salt Lake right now, and they have 4 games left to play. Same for Salt Lake. So they need to win out, and they need help, because 4 points might be just too little, too much to ask.
Yeah, and they got to jump over to the Galaxy as well to do that, which one team's not the end of the world, but yeah.
And the Galaxy have 1 game in hand and 1 point more than Seattle.
Yeah, so I'll go so far as right now as to say that I would put Seattle's a chance. They're the last team in there with a chance. Everything below them is definitely out, I would say. But I would argue that I don't think they're going to make it. I think that the numbers are against them right now, and that's going to be quite the run that will end for the Sounders, and I wouldn't expect that they will be down there again next year, but it is going to be interesting to see a playoff without the Sounders involved in it.
So the streak is 13 straight seasons with a playoff appearance for the Seattle Sounders, and that is very much in jeopardy this year of being stopped at 13.
Yeah, and they just they only 3 draws. That tells me that they're an all or nothing kind of team, right? 12-3-15 is their record, win, draw, loss. So that's a team that either is great on the day or not so great in the day. And but then you look at the overall too. They're +3 in the goal diff, and I always look at the goal diff first because that tells you more about what a team is. They're average. They're just blank average, and they're not getting the big goals when they need to, which is or even pulling to get points here and there, which is what they would have done in the past. Some of those 15 losses would have been turned into draws, and that's the difference. Seattle's just not firing, and a lot of that probably had to do with trying to, to taper, to use other sports terms, to taper their season, and that's just very difficult to do in an MLS roster.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we will now wrap up our MLS conversations by saying we will continue, of course, to be back on video starting Wednesday. Everything should be tested, and I should be done rebuilding all the aspect of the show, heading into the playoffs and heading into the September international window, back on video on Wednesday, covering Major League Soccer in the beautiful world from a Canadian and soccer perspective, heading into a great time for our country, our nation, our continent in the beautiful game. And now we will talk about the Canadian Premier League, Duane, as we continue our look this Monday at a league that is wrapping up its maybe most competitive season so far. At the top, it's still quite close, and we're seeing teams that were not expected, and we're seeing also teams that are perennial contenders still there. As always, when I look at the standings this Monday, maybe the biggest surprise this season, or maybe not. It was expected to see Atletico rise, but maybe not to the top of the table after 24 games, but they are with 41 points. Forge is second with 1 game in hand with 39 points. Then we have Cavalry, perennial contenders just like Forge, third with 38 points. Valor fourth, still in reach of a higher position. We have Pacific with 23 games played, 36 points. Fifth, that's troubling for Pacific. Did the CONCACAF run take too much out of the wave? Maybe too much momentum out of the wave for the Pacific FC team. York United 6th, the Wanderers 7th, and the Eddies of Edmonton dead last with 16 points.
Yeah, look, full credit to Edmonton for even having 16 points, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot they're up against, and they've actually played with a lot of heart and character, and I think have shown themselves well, all things considered. But they are clearly the 8th place team in this league. There's a lot to talk about here. Ottawa, you're right. I actually picked them in the playoffs. I believe I picked them 4th in my preseason, but I was one of the few people that had them even that high. This is a second-year team, but I think that we probably should have understood that a team that is backed by one of the best teams in Europe could probably find some talent here and there, and perhaps the lack of coaching before might have hurt them in their first. Well, this wasn't their first season. I always forget about the Island games. Don't count, guys.
And
not a season.
And the Mr. era don't count. Okay, We got exactly what we thought we'd get out of Mista. Let's be fully honest here.
Yeah, so now that they're doing quite well here. Now that said, what did I just say about MLS? I always look at goal diff first. They're +4. Forge in second is +20. That tells you a little bit something about Forge. They went on a bit of a slump. They lost 3 of 4. They lost. They did get a win yesterday. Daniel Crutzen, they're basically the best defender in the league, has been out all year. He comes back. Amazingly, Forge looks suddenly solid at the back again in his first game back, and he's only going to get better. I know that I've been saying that and beating that drum all year, that Forge is clearly the most talented team in this league, but they are. That said, Atletico has 2 more points than them. They have played 1 more game, so if Forge wins that game in hand, they will overtake them. But it's been a great season for both. But we mentioned Pacific. They only played 4 games in the CONCACAF League, which is far fewer than what Forge played last year. They are out of it now, but they are not 1 point of their last 4, right? They are falling down the standings after they were quite a bit ahead for most of the first half of the year. That is a team going the wrong way. Valor, with a couple big wins over Forge last week, managed to close that gap and make this what looks like a 5-team race for 4 playoff positions. But you're right, it is a really competitive league, and I do think that it's going to be a very interesting playoff. Even York too. I don't want to discount York. They've won 4 of their last 5 games. And Kevin, should I say who they signed?
Well, it's maybe Duane's favorite combination, at least of last name ever. Salazar De Rosario, having a good season, of course. But the other one is Mo Babuli, who has been having quite a resurgence with York United.
Yeah, he's been here. He signed 4 games ago. This is corresponded with York going on a bit of a tear, and in those 4 games, he has 4 goals. The team has 9 goals. So look, this is they've got, with this De Rosario and Babuli up top, they have a pretty high-powered offensive attack for a CanPL team, and they're probably too far back to overcome that, but it has been a nice little run for them. In terms of the only other, we haven't talked about Calgary. Calgary's doing Calgary stuff. They're kind of just in the middle there. The game of the weekend, the Canadian Classic in the CanPL, which is Cavalry and Forge, they have been the best 2 teams in this league for the duration of its existence, and they had another feisty affair with red cards galore and hard tackles and everything else in Hamilton on the weekend. It was quite the spectacle to watch. They came up with the short end of that, and they seem positioned about perfectly where they are right now.
Yeah, so Kyle Becker got a red card at the 70th minute, followed by a red card to Joseph Di Chiara at the 86th, and Michael Cantave got the other one at the 95th minute. So a red card galore, which Forge won 2-1 with a goal by David Chouanière and Abubakar Sissoko. Ali Adam Musa scored for Cavalry.
Yeah, and I actually should mention the Becker red card. It on slow replay looked quite bad because he came in pretty hard. I do think in his defense of Becker that he was going for the ball, but he got a little overzealous, but you can interpret it as a stomp on a leg. He might get more than 1 game suspension out of this. Yeah, it wouldn't shock me if he gets a 3-game roll, and he might be done for the rest of the regular season. So that is a wild card to consider when you're looking at Forge. Becker is key to a lot of the things that they do. But look, if you haven't watched CanPL up to now, and let's say you're a TFC fan or you're a Whitecaps fan, you can do worse than to focus on this the rest of the way, because this has been an interesting battle. These teams are pretty closely matched. You do have sort of a Yankees team in the Forge there that are, kind of reeling a bit after a great start, and also have that history behind them, what makes the rest of the league hate them. So you've got that enemy/hero, depending on your perspective there, that you can cheer for or against. So there's a lot of talking points here. We haven't mentioned Halifax yet. Maybe that's for the best, but I
was going to say, maybe that's for the best. Let's talk about the great fans that Halifax does have and how they can't keep this up for too long because they're going to erode some of it, but they're not that far, but they're just far away that I don't think they'll make the playoffs at all this year.
Yeah, there was this quick story that there was a woman ejected from the Hamilton Stadium for holding up a sign that said, "If you quit, I quit," last week, which was a bit overzealous in the Halifax security. But nonetheless, that tells you where the fans are kind of getting at it. And there is some, if you look at Hart Out, you can see some stuff out there. We love Stephen Hart. I've known Stephen Hart for a long time, so I'm not going to get into that. But I will say that it wouldn't shock me if Stephen Hart were to move into sort of a different role at the end of the year. That wouldn't surprise me, but we'll see. Halifax is not really taking advantage of their Great Island games that they had where they made the final in 2020.
No, and they're not taking advantage of the great fan base that they have also at the kitchen and around the stadium. One of the biggest attendances this year, and of course every single year since the Canadian Premier League has been in existence. On that note, we will take a break until tomorrow, until Wednesday. Wednesday will be our next show, back on video, so take a second and subscribe to our YouTube page, and of course our Facebook and Twitter page. Also, Duane at 24th Minute, myself at CF Montreal. This show available everywhere you find your favorite podcast. And as always, until next time, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.